HMS Eagle was an aircraft carrier converted from the hull of an incomplete ship. Unlike the conversions of Furious, Glorious, and Courageous, Eagle was originally planned to be a battleship that was constructed for the Chilean Navy, named Almirante Cochrane. With her conversion completed, she was commissioned as a carrier in 1924 and would serve in the Mediterranean and in the Far East in the China Station during the interwar period. At the outbreak of the Second World War, she assisted in the hunting for German commerce raiders in the Indian Ocean and proceeded to serve in various roles, but mainly in the Mediterranean for almost the next 3 years. However, on August 11, 1942, as she was assisting in Operation Pedestal to get supplies and aircraft to Malta, she was hit by 4 torpedoes from U-73, sinking rapidly. 160 men and officers went down with her. 789 men survived, including men who had flown off from her before the attack. The origins of the Almirante Cochrane and her completed sister ship, Almirante La Torre, to be changed to HMS Canada, stem from the arms race that took place in South America in the first half of the 20th century between Brazil, Argentina, and Chile, to match the Brazilian threat as their fleet was growing in size and power, with Brazil ordering a super dreadnought, which eventually turned into HMS Agincourt. The Chilean government wanted a ship that could defeat the Brazilian one, ending up with a ship that had a displacement of 28,622 tons and machinery for a top speed of 23 to 24 knots. An armament of 10 14-inch 45 caliber guns, 16 6-inch 50 caliber guns, 4 machine guns, and 4 torpedo tubes. Being launched in 1911, as the Great War came in August of 1914, the Almirante La Torre was near completion, while the Almirante Cochrane was nowhere near there. As you see, the Brazilian Rio de Janeiro, soon to be Agincourt, had occupied Armstrong's second set of stocks, and therefore the Almirante Cochrane had not been laid down until February 1913. Nevertheless, in August 1914, both the Almirante La Torre and the incomplete Almirante Cochrane were seized by the British as part of a plan to expropriate all warships building for foreign powers, and the Chilean pair fell into this category. HMS Canada, as the Almirante La Torre soon became known, was approved for a quick completion and saw service through the Great War, being repurchased by the Chilean government in April 1920. But the Almirante Cochrane was to remain in a state of suspension until purchased by the Admiralty in 1918 for completion as an aircraft carrier. She was launched as Eagle on June 8, 1918, but work on her was suspended again while the design was overhauled in light of the trials with Furious and Argus. November of 1919, board approval was given to complete her to a limited extent for flying trials to test her capabilities as a carrier, along with other ideas, like the validity of the starboard side island arrangement. On her first trial, she was incomplete, without armament or forefunnel, tripod, or masts. In these trials, 143 landings were made with only 12 minor incidents and no casualties. The trials were completed on October 27, 1920, turning out to only be a qualified success, with modifications greatly increasing her all-around value. Following the trial's completion, she was eventually sent to Portsmouth Dockyard on February 21, 1921, for completion of the new design. The basic battleship hull was retained, with anti-torpedo bulges added below the waterline. The original armor belt of 9 inches was replaced by a 4.5-inch thick one to protect the machinery and magazines against fire from cruisers and destroyers. The original 3-inch armor deck was retained, and the original forecastle became the main strength deck, upon which the 1,000-ton hangar was placed. The flight deck was formed from 1-inch plates supported by girders. The flight deck was built in such a way that the forward end of the flight deck fared into the forecastle by plating, helping to improve airflow over the deck, as well as the rounded end forming the after part of the flight deck to smooth airflow immediately after the hull where the aircraft would approach at low speeds. Certainly one of Eagle's most distinct features was her island on the starboard side of the flight deck amidships, containing the compass platform, flying control, intelligence office, and ready rooms for aircrew, as well as 2 funnels where the ducting came from the 4 boiler rooms horizontally across the ship below the hangar deck. Until the Invincible class from 1980, Eagle was the only British carrier to have 2 funnels. The hangar was serviced by 2 lifts to the flight deck, with the forward one being shaped to allow aircraft to be struck down with their wings spread. Unlike earlier conversions, Eagle did not have a quarterdeck capable of operating seaplanes with access from an after opening in the hangar. Instead, she was fitted with a large crane aft of the island. The crane had a secondary use, lifting aircraft from the dockside onto the ship when they were not flown on board. In her career, Eagle went through a number of refits, which we will discuss as they come up in her operational history. Eagle's technical details as of 1942 was a displacement of 27,500 tons deep load. As for machinery, she had 4 shafts powered by Brown and Curtis HP turbines, with steam provided by 52 Yarrow boilers, giving 50,000 shaft horsepower and a top speed of 24 knots. Her armament consisted of the original 9 6-inch guns, 5 single 4-inch high-angle guns, 2 octuple 2-pounders added in 1937, 12 single 20mm Oerlikons added in 1942. Her protection consisted of a 4.5-inch thick waterline belt, 4-inch bulkheads, 1.5-inch thick hangar deck, and a 1-inch flight deck. Her flight deck was 652 feet long and 96 feet wide, while her hangar was 400 feet long by 66 feet wide by 20 feet 6 inches tall, giving her a capacity of 22 aircraft. After the final completion of her conversion in September of 1923, she began her acceptance trials for the flying off arrangements from the 5th of October 1923 until February 20th, 1924, finally being commissioned for service for the Mediterranean Fleet on the 26th, replacing the old seaplane carrier Ark Royal, with her initial air group being comprised of Flycatchers, Blackburn Darts, and Seagull 3s. In 1926, she was refitted in Devonport Dockyard, and the fore and aft retaining wires were permanently removed. Upon recommissioning, she joined the new carrier Courageous for coordinated exercises, and later in 1928, fitted with a hangar spray firefighting system. In 1930, she carried out successful night flying off missions before returning to the UK in January 1931, embarking for a special service flight with new planes like the Hawker Nimrod and Osprey fighters to go to Buenos Aires to support an exhibition of British industry. Upon returning to the UK, she was reboilered and fitted with improved close-range weapons and directors, eventually recommissioned January 1933 due to a manpower shortage, where she journeyed to the Far East for service on the China Station. On the China Station, her aircraft searched for pirate junks and attacked bands of robbers or highwaymen on the coast when requested to do so by the Chinese government. In October of 1934, she was relieved by Hermes on the China Station and moved to the Mediterranean to replace Furious. While in June of 1935, Eagle returned to Devonport and went into the reserve to await refit. Being carried out in 1936, she was fitted with arrestor wires and flight deck lighting to allow regular night flying to take place. Stowage for air weapons was increased, and more close-range anti-aircraft weapons were fitted. When this was complete in 1937, she went back to the China Station with Swordfish. Upon arriving in Hong Kong, she relieved Hermes and flew on her ferry Seals. In 1939, she was refit in the Singapore dockyard and joined the cruisers Cornwall and Dorsetshire to form Force One and hunt German commerce raiders in the Indian Ocean. Heading to Durban in South Africa, where her boilers were cleaned, and sailed from Colombo, helping to escort the first Australian troops to the Middle East. When rejoining Force One on March 14, 1940, a 250-pound bomb detonated as it was being moved to the bomb room, causing damage to the ship and forcing her to go to Singapore dockyard and be repaired. On the 9th of May, she sailed from Singapore to replace Glorious in the Mediterranean. Upon arriving, she began supporting convoy movements in the eastern Mediterranean. After Italy's entry into the war, her aircraft helped to carry out attacks on Tobruk while she was in Alexandria. On July 9th, during the action off Calabria, her aircraft helped with the spotting fall of shot and carried out torpedo attacks on the Italian fleet. The rest of the month saw Eagle's aircraft do more devastating strikes in Italian positions in North Africa and defeating Italian aircraft. On the 4th of September, she assisted the new carrier Illustrious in striking airfields on the island of Rhodes, destroying enemy aircraft and hangars, with 4 of her Swordfish being shot down in the process. While on the 28th, Eagle was damaged by bombs that narrowly missed and caused extensive damage, which was not fully appreciated at the time. On the 27th of October, Eagle's aircraft attacked a seaplane stationed on the island of Stampalia as part of a covering force for Allied troops on the island of Crete. Due to repairs following this operation, Eagle was not available for the attack on Taranto in early November, although the repair work was completed by mid-November, spending that month helping to escort convoys and support British operations in North Africa. It wouldn't be until January 1941 where she sailed as a diversion as Illustrious was badly damaged off Malta. March and April saw her aircraft disembarked and used to attack Italian ships in the Red Sea. However, on April 12th, her aircraft were re-embarked to pass through the Suez Canal to assist in attacking German commerce raiders in the Indian Ocean. With fears that Bismarck might try to enter the South Atlantic, Eagle, in company with Nelson, left Cape Town to guard against this. In June, her aircraft sank the Elbe, one of Bismarck's supply ships, while the Lothringen, another one, surrendered intact to Swordfish. The next few months saw her in the South Atlantic hunting for German raiders, but on September the 20th, an accidental hangar fire destroyed 13 aircraft while operating off St. Helena. Damage was so severe that she had to return to the UK for repairs. Arriving in Clyde on the 26th of October for repairs and a refit, including new radars, 20mm Oerlikons, as well as aircraft fuel stowage being increased. On completion, she embarked with Swordfish and Sea Hurricanes, working up for service with Force H replacing Ark Royal. On February 22nd, Eagle landed her aircraft at Gibraltar and took on 16 RAF Spitfires to take to Malta. To increase the range of the aircraft, naval air mechanics fit them with drop tanks. Once this was complete, Eagle sailed as part of an operation to ferry the aircraft to Malta, with all the Spitfires landing on Malta by the 6th. The next several months saw her in this role as either a ferry for the aircraft to Malta or as part of the covering force guarding the convoys to Malta, leading us to August 1942, where Eagle sailed as part of Operation Pedestal, the largest convoy to be fought through to Malta. Operation Pedestal, as it was known, had the objective of bringing 14 merchant vessels to the beleaguered island of Malta, as it was under almost constant air attack from German and Italian planes. With the war in the Mediterranean in the summer of 1942 looking rather bleak, and especially on Malta, Max Hastings has this to say in his book Operation Pedestal, The Fleet That Battled to Malta. Amid such grim realities, which provoked bitter words in both high places and low, Churchill and his warlords were confronted by tidings that, unless supplies of food, fuel, and ammunition could be shipped to Malta before the leaves fell at home, its surrender was inevitable. Thus, in the summer of 1942, the decision was taken that Malta must be sent sustenance at almost any cost. The undertaking of this operation was massive, bringing together one of the largest fleets the Royal Navy had committed to action since the Battle of Jutland in 1916, including 2 battleships, 4 aircraft carriers, 7 cruisers, 32 destroyers, 8 submarines, 2 minesweepers, around 100 naval and RAF aircraft, and a large number of smaller craft. In early August, ships were being gathered in the United Kingdom and elsewhere, where they began to assemble for the journey through the western Mediterranean. Under the command of Acting Vice Admiral Neville Seifert, on Sunday, August 9th, Admiral Seifert's ships entered the Straits of Gibraltar. In this operation, Eagle's role was to cover the convoy from high-altitude attacks using her 20 Sea Hurricanes. The convoy passed through the 10th amid continuous tension, as in the morning they had to deal with a thick fog, making it difficult to see the ships around. Not only that, they feared attacks mainly from aircraft and submarines. The attack they feared came the following morning at 4:42 a.m., 60 miles south of Ibiza, when an Italian submarine launched 3 torpedoes intended for Furious. Her captain reported that Furious had been sunk, when in reality all 3 missed, with false claims being commonplace throughout the battle. Later that morning at 8:15, the first German aircraft were detected by radar, to which Hurricanes were scrambled to intercept, failing to catch up with the German aircraft as they could not climb high enough before the German intruders arrived, these being German bombers acting as reconnaissance. The next significant event of the day was Operation Bellows, a subsidiary phase of Pedestal, the takeoff of 37 Spitfires to Malta. This was carried out from the morning to early afternoon. However, by 1 p.m., a disaster was beginning to unfold for the Royal Navy, as they were being stalked by several submarines, including the German U-boat U-73 under its commander, Helmut Rosenbaum. U-73 sailed from La Spezia on the 3rd. This craft was one of the 750-ton Type 7Bs. Heading into the inland sea, Rosenbaum found himself west of Sardinia on August the 10th, when the Abwehr's watchers identified Eagle and the cruiser Cairo. With a third of his crew sick with the stomach bug, Rosenbaum moved to a position southwest of the Balearic Islands early on the morning of the 11th. The first sign that the Pedestal fleet was coming his way was when his hydrophone operators detected propeller noises coming from the west. Several ships passed over the U-boat before she slipped unnoticed between 2 screening destroyers. The U-boat made a 2.5-hour approach as it crossed over 1 column of ships between the tanker Ohio and the cargo ship Santa Elisa. When Rosenbaum raised his periscope next, HMS Eagle was fast approaching his position. She was zigzagging away from him, but he understood that she would change course back towards him. Dropping the periscope, he took the boat deeper for several minutes, coming back up at 1:02 to scan the sea and saw Eagle approaching him, almost bow on. Seeing other vessels, including cargo ships vital to Malta, instead he chose to prioritize the richest prize, the carrier. I'll let Max Hastings tell you about the next events more eloquently. He slowed from 8 knots to 3. Perhaps surprisingly, he allowed himself a shot of brandy before starting the attack. Then he returned to periscope depth and saw the carrier again, looking like a giant matchbox on a pond. He registered even the fighters on her flight deck. He ordered the torpedoes to be set to run at a depth of 20 feet, which should strike their huge target in her engine rooms, the very guts of Eagle. At 1:05, Rosenbaum ordered his torpedo men, a 19-year-old who was among the youngest members of the crew, to fire 4 torpedoes in a narrow pattern at intervals of 2.5 seconds. The boat shuddered as the salvo left the tubes. Then Rosenbaum ordered as steep a descent as he could contrive, hastened by making every available crewman scramble forward to compensate for the loss of weight of the expended torpedoes. Eagle took 4 torpedo hits, causing thunderous detonations on her hull. The carrier took an immediate list to port, steepening further as thousands of tons of water poured into the machinery spaces, with every stoker in B boiler room and greaser in the port engine room perishing. A pilot, Mike Crossley, remembers the screams and pitiful shouts of men's voices echoing up the engine room ventilators as they lay trapped below in darkness. While on deck, 41-year-old Jeffrey Mandeville in the act of taking off in his Hurricane as the explosions rocked Eagle. Instead of taking off, his Hurricane began slowly and unstoppably sliding towards the sea. As the ship continued to list, attempts were made to lower the boats to no avail, with some men leaping onto the high side toward the sea, and instead of landing in the water, they smashed against the exposed keel. Though others scrambled over the sides and made it into the water, with some even singing, this being shut down by a senior officer, telling them that they'd need their breath. These survivors began to head towards the Carly floats that were in the water, one of them being the captain, Lachlan McIntosh, who'd commanded Eagle for just 2 months, being covered in oil and pulled into a raft by some of his crew. Eagle went down quickly at 1:15, as Arthur Thorpe, a war correspondent on Eagle, said. Then came a mighty rumbling as the sea poured into Eagle, forcing out the air. Water thrashed over her in a fury of white foam and then subsided. She went carefully. She never meant to hurt a soul. The ship capsized with some men walking on the bilge keel as she turned over. Few of these survived as she went down. The survivors spent quite a long time in the water and had to deal with the depth charge attacks against U-73, with Crossley writing, "Every time an underwater explosion concussed our vitals, I could hear the most dreadful oaths coming from the bobbing heads, new words which I had never heard before." Smaller escorting vessels, including the 700-ton Jaunty and the destroyer Lookout, pulled men onto their ships, with some 500 men coming on board the tiny Jaunty. Although traumatizing to the almost 800 survivors, this experience of seeing Eagle's abrupt end stuck with almost everyone in the fleet, with Seaman Chris Gold writing to his fiancée Vera from the destroyer Lightning, "I'm not very happy, darling, as things have started a lot too soon this time. We've been at action stations since 1 this afternoon, when we had a concentrated attack by submarines. It was bloody awful. A carrier was hit and sunk in less than 8 minutes. I saw it go. She just rolled onto her side and disappeared. What an awful feeling it gives you in the pit of your stomach. We stand a much better chance in a destroyer, but that doesn't stop you from being frightened." Rosenbaum on board U-73 wrote out the attacks on the submarine, surfacing at 6:15 p.m. with the British fleet some 50 miles to the east, reporting the sinking of Eagle, being told that he was to receive the Knight's Cross for his actions. This action was the triumphant moment of his wartime career. While the rest of the story of Operation Pedestal is filled with more exciting and tragic tales, with merchantmen being forced to scatter later on, with some making it to Malta, while the loss of Eagle was certainly among the most significant events of this operation. HMS Eagle had a long and very interesting career, especially during her time at the China Station. Even though, like other British carriers I've covered on this channel, she met a tragic end with 158 men and 2 officers going down with her. I think an appropriate way to close this video out is through another eyewitness account of her sinking, with another war correspondent, Anthony Kimmins, on board the cruiser Nigeria. He wrote, "It was so sudden that it almost took one's breath away. A great brown column of water rose to 3 times the height of her topmast. For a long time, everyone was very quiet and subdued." Thank you all for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe as it will help the channel to grow. And until next time, my friends, have a great day.